Sorry, Mama, I didn't. Okay.
Hi everybody. We'll do chapter 8 of the dear old Briar patch now. Let's see, first of all, I want to say hi to everybody. Hello to Jackson, Matthew, Marjorie, and Emma here in Maine. Hello to Malia and Lucas in Missouri. To Kai Ming and Rukai in Washington State. And let's see, to Dylan and Lucas here in Maine. To our friends Leslie and Mary way over in England. To Ezzy and Indy in Oklahoma. To Kayla here in Maine. To Sylvia, Macy, and Lillian in Maine. To Harper and Judson in Maine. Caden and Xander in Maine. Evangeline and Isaac in Rhode Island. To Mabel in the country of China. To Oliver, Madeline, and Wyatt way out west. And to Alex here in Maine, up along the Penobscot River. So, let's see now. Chapter 8, Bob White's Little Joke. And that must be a picture of Bob White right there, the bird. Be not too sure you know it all, for thus you're riding for a fall. And that's from Bob White. Bob White, Bob White, Bob White. Peter Rabbit hopped out of the old briar patch and sat up to look across the green meadows. Listen, he commanded as Mrs. Peter joined him. Bob White is whistling his own name. And what a distance he can be heard. I love to hear him. Mrs. Peter nodded. So do I, said she. We haven't a better neighbor than Bob White. Bob White whistled again, and Peter decided he would make him a morning call. He said so. You stay right here, Peter Rabbit. If he wants to see you, he can come over here. Your place is at home, not running all over the country, said Mrs. Peter severely. I think he is on the green meadows over near the cornfield, said Peter, as if he hadn't heard a word of what Mrs. Peter had said. She said nothing more, but turned back into the dear old briar patch. She had learned through experience, when Peter had made up his mind to go somewhere, go he would. There was nothing she could do about it. Making sure that no danger was in sight, Peter kicked up his long heels, and away he went. Lippity-lippity-lip. Bob White, beautifully clear, came that cheery whistle. Now and then Peter sat up to listen better and make sure of the direction. I don't see how Bob dares do it, thought Peter. Why, he tells everybody right where he is. All one has to do is follow the sound of that whistle. It is a wonder to me that he hasn't been caught long ago by Reddy Fox. Nearer and nearer sounded those clear notes. Peter was now near Farmer Brown's cornfield. Curiously enough, that whistle didn't sound any louder than it had when he had been at the old briar patch. Peter thought that queer. He was sure he had the right direction. He sat up again to try to make sure. Suddenly that whistle sounded louder and clearer, but instead of coming from in front of him, it seemed to come from behind him. I must have run past Bob without seeing him, thought Peter. He isn't far away, that is sure. I thought he would be on a fence post over here, but he isn't. However, I know just where that whistle is coming from now, and I can go straight to him. Lippity-lippity-lip, away he went. Almost at once, Bob White sounded farther away. Yes, sir, he sounded farther off. Could he have flown without being seen? Peter was sure he couldn't. He stopped again to listen and look. Then he ran this way and that, hunting for Bob White, sure that he was near. Still, he couldn't find him. Every time Peter was about to give up, Bob White would whistle. At last, Peter suspected the truth, that Bob White was teasing him. He didn't like to be teased any more than you do. He began to be angry and stamped. Careful, careful, warned a voice. It would be bad enough to be stepped on by feet like those, but to be stamped on would be worse, continued the voice. It was the same voice, Bob White's voice. Peter stared all about. He looked straight at Bob White without seeing him. Where are you hiding, Bob White? He demanded a bit crossly. I'm not hiding. Why don't you use your eyes a little? If you would use them as well as you do your feet, you wouldn't need to ask where I am, retorted Bob White. Once more, Peter carefully looked all around. In so doing, he turned his back to Bob White, who was lying flat in the grass. Instantly, Bob was on his feet and whistled as loud as, "Bob! Bob White!" Peter jumped as if he had stepped on something sharp. He turned quickly. There stood his friend, just as if he had popped up right out of the ground. That is how it seemed to Peter. "Where did you come from?" he demanded. "I didn't come. I was here. You were the one who did the coming," said Bob White. "You were not here a moment ago. I looked everywhere, and you were not in sight." "I saw you looking everywhere." "I was in plain sight, but you didn't see me." "Oh, I already read that, didn't I? If I could see you, and I could and did, it is queer you couldn't see me. You gave me a real fright," said Bob. "How did I give you a fright?" demanded Peter. "I thought you were going to step on me. I did for a fact," declared Bob. "That's just talk. You are pretending that," said Peter. Bob shook his pretty head. "Nothing of the kind. I really mean it. You don't use your eyes much, do you, Peter?" Peter was getting provoked again. "Now look here, Bob White. I came all the way from the old briar patch just to make a friendly call, and you sent me to wandering about and hide from me and make fun of me. I don't think that's very friendly or nice at all. Now show me just where you were hiding," said he. Had Peter not been looking right at him, it's more likely that Bob would again have disappeared. Peter's eyes popped right out. You see, Bob simply flattened himself on the ground right where he was, with his feathers fluffed out. He didn't look like a bird at all. Peter knew then that he must have looked right at Bob without seeing him. He grinned at the joke on himself. "There's one thing more I want to know. How do you dare tell everybody right where you are?" said he. Bob chuckled. "Did I tell you right where I was?" he asked. "Well, almost," replied Peter lamely. "Almost isn't just where. You would still be looking for me if I hadn't spoken and shown myself," said the handsome quail, for that is what Bob White is commonly called. "No, I wouldn't," declared Peter. "I would have given up and gone away before this." "Then you should understand why I dare whistle," retorted Bob White. "I can make it sound far away or near, and it isn't as easy to find me as people think. Reddy Fox is the smartest fellow around here, but he hasn't been smart enough to catch me," Peter interrupted. "Smart as he is, Reddy has been fooled just as you were. He knows better now than to hunt me just because he hears me," Bob White finished, just as if Peter hadn't spoken. "I understand now how you can fool his eyes and ears, but how can you fool his nose is something I don't understand," said Peter. "That's easy," said Bob, in the most matter-of-fact tone. "If I keep perfectly still with the feathers pressed close, there is no scent for him to smell. It's quite simple. I have known Reddy to pass close to Mrs. Bob on a nest and not suspect she was near," explained Bob. "That reminds me, is Mrs. Bob around here?" asked Peter. "She isn't far away," replied Bob. "What's she doing?" Peter inquired. "Sitting," replied Bob briefly. "Do you mean she has eggs?" cried Peter. "We have," said Bob. "Excuse me," begged Peter. "If she's sitting on eggs, of course they are yours as well as hers. Would you mind showing me the nest?" Bob White looked very hard at Peter. "Did I understand you to ask something?" he asked. Peter looked a bit confused. "That was a slip of the tongue," he explained hurriedly. "What I meant to say is that I would like to meet Mrs. Bob." "That is easily arranged," said another voice. Peter turned. There was Mrs. Bob close by, but where she had come from he had no idea. Oh, and here's a picture of Bob White and Mrs. Bob, and there's Peter Rabbit looking at them. There they are. Well, let's see. He was most polite. "I am so glad to see you, Mrs. Bob White," said he. "I hope you are well. How are the eggs?" "Warm when I left them. I guess they'll be warm when I get back," replied Mrs. Bob, her bright eyes twinkling. Peter's eyes twinkled too. "I suppose that means that you expect a happy event one of these days," said he. "Many happy events, not just one," replied Mrs. Bob, and her eyes twinkled more than ever. "I stand corrected. May I ask how many, and when, and where?" replied Peter. "You may ask, but it will still remain our secret, Bob's and mine," said Mrs. Bob demurely. And that's the end of the chapter. Read another one soon. Okay, bye-bye, everybody.